Well, we're joined now by Dr. Beyrer, who is President-elect of the International AIDS Society. He's also Director of the John Hopkins Fogarty AIDS International Training and Research Program. And he'll take up his post, officially at least, as President at the conclusion of this conference. Dr. Beyrer, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's just start, I guess, with where are we now? What are some of the most pressing issues in HIV in the world today?
Well, we have some really important challenges ahead, and we've had some important advances. And I think that part of what's going to happen at this conference is that we're going to hear about both of those sets of issues. In the challenges leading up to this conference, there was a lot of enthusiasm for cure, or at least for sustained remission of HIV disease. And we, unfortunately, one of the very few people, a child in Mississippi in the United States who appeared to have been cured, turned out actually to have virus in her body, and it has replicated and come back. And so this suggests that there is still a great deal about the reservoir of HIV, the kind of hiding places of HIV in the body that we still don't understand, and that are going to be a significant challenge to whether or not we'll ever be able to cure HIV infection. On the treatment front, of course, we have wonderful outcomes. So antiviral therapy, triple therapy has extended life in countries where it's available, like Australia, almost to a full life expectancy. That is just extraordinary from a disease that just a few decades ago was uniformly fatal. But the challenge now is that still fewer than half the people in the world who are living with HIV are on the therapy they need. And we are in an era of limited resources, of changing donor interest and priorities. And so we're really facing, I think, an enormous challenge of how we're going to get treatment to the other 24 million people living with HIV in the world who are not on it today. And one of the things we've learned recently is that successful treatment, where someone's viral load is fully suppressed and the virus is not replicating or at very low levels in the body, is that those people are no longer infectious. Their infectiousness is dramatically reduced. So treatment is prevention. And there's a great deal of science around this issue now, and what we understand is that untested and untreated HIV is infectious HIV. And so getting to the next millions of people who need therapy is the operational challenge ahead of us. There'll be a great deal of discussion about how we do that, the costing around that, the operational challenges, the political and leadership challenges, and a lot of the operational science challenges of, given our limited resources, how do we more efficiently and effectively deliver the services that people need?
Just on some of those challenges, I mean, some of your work is focused on the increased risk affecting marginalised and stigmatised populations. What effects are we seeing, and how can we tackle that?
So this is unfortunately an area where we've seen a lot of setbacks in the last several years. There have been a number of countries that, rather than embracing pragmatic public health approaches, have enacted discriminatory laws and policies. A very good example is in the area of men who have sex with men, gay men. Men who have sex with men, have been at the center of the HIV epidemic since its very beginning. Certainly in this country, many of the first cases were in the gay community. What we've seen and understood is that when people are not afraid to access services, they will. They'll come for testing. People are willing to get on treatment, and treatment, as I said, is prevention. But unfortunately, what we've seen is a number of countries, Russia, India, Nigeria, Uganda, have in the last 2 years enacted harsh, discriminatory new laws, criminalizing same-sex behavior, criminalizing discussing homosexuality, the so-called propaganda laws like the one in Russia. And these are limiting people's access to essential services. People are afraid to get tested. They're afraid to come forward, as we all would be. They're unwilling to expose themselves to those risks. And so we're actually seeing in 2014 declining access to services for the people who need it the most, and that's a huge problem.
You've done a lot of work on the issue of human rights violations as well, and their impact on public health. What have been, I guess, the most effective ways of combating these human rights violations?
Well, certainly, unfortunately in this area, many of the human rights violations are committed by states or state actors, particularly the police. So a good example is there's a lot of science that you'll see at the conference. There's a special issue of The Lancet coming out that I guest edited with a number of colleagues that looks very carefully at HIV among sex workers. It's women, men, and transgender persons who sell sex. Ubiquitous, very high levels of violence, particularly police violence, directed against sex workers. Harassment, brutality, sexual exploitation. All of these increase HIV risks, and we see in country after country that just carrying condoms can often get women accused of being sex workers, right? So from a public health perspective, we want people to carry condoms, but the police use that as evidence of prostitution, sex work, and that is a real challenge. The positive reality is, of course, that police reform can play a critical role in creating what we call enabling environments where people are supported to engage in safer behaviors, to reduce their risks, to reduce the risks of their partners. A great example is the policing practices in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, where sex work has been decriminalized and where the police play a role in protecting sex workers from violence, in reducing trafficking, in making sure that underage people are protected and not in the sex industry. So there really are ways forward that can both meet the goals of protecting human rights and civil liberties and doing a better job at HIV prevention.
And more generally, I guess, as President-elect, what are your hopes for the future coming out of this conference?
Well, as everybody I think is aware, this conference began with a painful start, with a loss of life. I think for all of us, we've felt a sense of renewed commitment to the critical principles of this movement, which have always been about inclusion, about making sure that the most marginalized people have access to services, making sure that there's real equity in access to health care, and that's certainly what I'm going to focus my presidency on.
Dr. Beyrer, thanks very much for your time, and thanks for joining us on the program, and all the very best for the week ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.